Cunliffe.
Chairman, it's traditional in the title and commencement clause debate at the committee stage to use the title to draw together some of the themes of the discussion. And I guess it's with a certain sense of sadness that the opposition is here witnessing this bill moving its way through the House. And maybe one could call it the "what a difference a day makes" bill if that day were the last election. Because the contrast between a regulatory framework which is pro-competitive and has led to an upswing in investment and a better deal for consumers under the previous government, and this slide back to the bad old days of Maurice Williamson's wet bus ticket, where the legislation favours the dominant incumbent. Now here we are creating, sadly, a new monopoly structure on fibre to replace the existing monopoly structure or dominant structure, or the pre-reform dominant structure on copper. There are a number of reasons why that is true. The first is that the so-called regulatory forbearance period, the regulatory holiday which the government proposed, which was to take the cop off the beat. The Commerce Commission is the industry cop. It stops people abusing market power. And this regulatory holiday would have tied their hands for a decade. And that was obviously a nonsense. And as my colleague Trevor Mallard has said, it's a matter of great regret that only late in the piece did the Māori Party apparently wake up and have a discussion with the government about that, and that apparently led to some change, although not a good one. Part of the regulatory holiday is still there on point to multi-point services, which in our view is inappropriate. The Minister's never explained it. But more importantly, the rest of it's been exchanged for a taxpayer-funded guarantee to an incumbent that if they are caught out in future years with excessive margins because the cost of providing the services has fallen and the price hasn't, then if they are penalised by the Commerce Commission, they won't pay, the taxpayer will pay. And it's extraordinary, Mr. Chairman. It's an extraordinary insult being added to injury, but the original injury was to the regulatory coherence of this industry. And that's why everybody in the industry, except for the incumbent telco, was united in saying the government's legislation was utter and absolute rubbish. And we had submission after submission to the Select Committee. And while they raised a range of issues, they were unanimous, other than telecom, that this bill should not proceed. But here we are, because what a difference a day makes. The government is simply using its numbers to put through what in its heart of hearts it must know, the Minister must know, is simply misguided legislation. The second key issue why this is a very, very bad bill was around and is around the lack of rigour in the open access regime. Less important, we give you, in terms of retail, because structural separation, we assume, of telecom will proceed. But crucially important in wholesale and network access. Crucially important in those critical dark fibre, the dark fibre access, where other wholesalers now have no guarantee that they'll be able to access the same product at the same price in the same way as Chorus will provide to its own. And so we are replacing a problem of vertically integrated dominance on copper with a new problem on fibre. And that'll mean that everybody in the gallery watching will pay too much for their broadband in years to come, for at least a decade to come under this bill. Or for their copper, that's right. Which brings, Mr. Mallard raises an important point. It's the next one on my list, which is the mandatory averaging on copper pricing. This bill, the broadband stuff on fibre is so bad that the only way that the government could make it worthwhile, the industry playing, was to raise the price on everybody's existing phone bill. For no change in service, the brief to us said $5 a month extra for the average house in a city. Because, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cunliffe.
Because the price will be now averaged as a matter of government policy between city consumers and rural consumers. Once again, it looks like the farming sector is getting a sweet deal out of this government and urban consumers are being penalised. Your phone bills, people, are being put up by this government to make it look like a better deal or no worse deal for you to swap to fibre, which is too expensive. Why is it too expensive? Because the government subsidy was inadequate. It wasn't enough money. They wanted a commercial rate of return on it, and the telcos said they couldn't pay. So the government sold the law. They sold the law to the tune of what the officials have advised was between 400 million and 600 million of disguised subsidies by making the rules slacker and allowing the telcos to rip off the consumer. And that is an outrage, and it sets the course of the industry back a decade. And it was painful getting the progress that was made, but the progress was real. Here's the proof of the pudding. The progress was real. New Zealand climbed up the broadband rankings in the noughties, and it's fallen back since 2008 from about 5th or 6th on most criteria to about 12th or 13th. We have tumbled down the international rankings because the government, this minister, went around parading the $1.5 billion broadband plan, but like everything else under this dishwater shallow national administration, there never was a plan. There never was a plan. There was a marketing slogan designed by Crosby, Textor, or some foreign spin doctor to get them elected, and there never was a plan. I can think of no other reason why it took an intelligent man like Stephen Joyce 2.5 years of nothing to come up with a policy. And 2.5 years later, he's come up with an absolutely rotten, retrograde policy that sets the industry back a decade, costs everybody in the gallery, everybody out in New Zealand, $5 a month more on their existing phone bill, and consigns them to higher prices on broadband, ultra-slow broadband, for 10 years to come. This is not the UFB, this is the USB, ultra-slow broadband. It took Stephen Joyce 3 years to think up a set of dumb rules that cost the public too much money. Mandatory averaging, an open access regime that doesn't work, a stupid regulatory holiday that even in the end the Maori Party couldn't support. And here's the next bit, an asset split. This is supposed to be a government that's running the show. How do you like this? Telecom gets to decide how it structurally separates, and it only tells the minister after the fact. After the board has signed off to its own internal commercial satisfaction, the minister has zero prerogative to override the substance, zero requirement to consult with the industry. And Telecom, how do you like this, has zero requirement to put all the details in the public domain. A summary is okay. So the asset split, who would know? But I'll tell you what, if I was running that company now and under an obligation to my shareholders to maximise profit, I could certainly hide a few lurks and perks in the detail that not the minister and not the public would never know about until it was too late. Have they been asleep for the last 20 years? Do they not know the games that are played in this industry? Why are they playing back into the hands of dominant incumbents and creating a new problem of monopoly on wholesale fibre just like used to exist on copper? Mr. Speaker, there's much more to say. I won't go through it all now. That this bill is so bad it probably breaches New Zealand's World Trade Organisation undertakings because it's a disguised subsidy to a local incumbent. How bad is that? And it's also possibly, we should say, there's conflicting advice on this, it possibly conveys some favourable tax treatment on certain members of the industry. We're not quite sure about that, but it certainly wasn't case proven at the Select Committee. Mr. Speaker, summing up very briefly, this is the what a difference a day makes We were used to have fast broadband, now we get ultra-slow broadband. People are paying too much for their phones. They're going to be consigned to slower, more expensive fibre than they would have had if this bill wasn't passed.
Honourable David Parker.
Mr. Chairman.